Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so I tried to record this before and for some reason it didn't take, so we're gonna try it again, which actually works out because here's what we're gonna do. Okay, so for the boys, this story is pretty hardcore. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put the as safe as we can make it version on YouTube, right? So like if we're cutting stuff out, different things like that, and not really revealing a lot of like the extreme stuff. And then like for the fans who really want like the uncut version, we're gonna put that one on Patreon, right? So it'll cost you like $1 or something like that if you want to see it, but you'll see the uncut versions whenever they come out. But the boys, a lot of you guys have been asking for this, and maybe I'm too late here, right? Like maybe nobody cares. I'm not really sure. But the boys is a pretty intense comic. It's a pretty hardcore comic insofar as there's really no punches pulled here. And that's the beauty of kind of having what's basically an indie comic, because you can just sort of get away with your own thing, right? This is Dynamite Entertainment, so it's cool with what Grant Morrison can do. But what it does is it initially picks up with Billy Butcher. Now, Billy Butcher being here is one of these things where like right off the bat, like Garth Ennis gives us this perspective, right? Because you got Billy Butcher sitting on a park bench in front of the Capitol building, and like some superheroes fly over, and he's like, I'm gonna get you guys. Like literally, I'm gonna tear you guys up. So right off the bat, we know that he absolutely despises superheroes. And then at this point, we switch over to Huey. Now, for Huey, I feel a little bit bad, but at the same time, it was also kind of funny because I remember I saw this and I was like, dude, that sucks. and it's not funny. All right, it's not funny. So in the TV show, Huey's introduced to us as a guy who's basically a loser, right? He just can't get his life together, right? I mean, he's still living with his parents, even despite the fact that he's a grown man, right? Should definitely have his own place, but he's still living with his dad. And Robin, for the most part, their relationship is on the rocks. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say that Robin's given him the boot in the TV show, he was certainly being handed his hat, right? I mean, he wasn't really out of the game, but he was on his way out the door, and she was getting ready to bring in whoever it was that she was going to bring in next, right? And so it was kind of like, okay, Huey's basically on his way out. In the comic, it's not that way. In the comic, him and Robin are very much in love. And like, it's one of these things where they started dating not too long ago, but she's like, I knew after a week that I was ready to marry you. So like, there's no indication that things are going south. And in fact, the two of them are basically just now getting engaged, right? It's just one of these things where it's like, we're meant to be together. So like, they're engaged, they're in it to win it, they're off to the races, which in reality, I find this to be a lot more intriguing than what we saw in the show, right? Because in the show, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, she should probably leave him because the guy's kind of a loser. He can get his life together, whatever, but like, she can probably do better. Word to the wise for all those young folks out there, if you're a guy, be a guy worth dating, right? This ain't the 1950s anymore. But ladies, be a woman worth having. Just because you're a woman does not mean you're a woman worth dating. Be someone worth dating. That's the number one rule when it comes to the dating game. All right, like it's a very important thing. But it's kind of a cool thing, and it's kind of sad because when they're celebrating their engagement, they're celebrating their engagement together, and then wham! This guy goes flying into a brick wall. Robin goes with him. Her arms get ripped off, and Huey's just standing there with this chick's arms in his hands. It's messed. Okay, it's not funny. All right, it's it's not funny. I'm sorry, it's funny. And A-Train's just like, get out of the way, just like takes off, right? Just like takes off running. Now, from here, it switches over to the Central Intelligence Agency, to the CIA. And this is one of the craziest parts of the story, right? So you've got this chick, Susan Rayner, who's basically the director of the CIA. Now, her and Billy Butcher go back a little ways, right? They went back to Afghanistan when they bombed a village. And the idea, well, we'll talk about more of why she views Billy the way she does. But it's kind of a crazy thing because it's like she's basically told by her secretary, hey, look, Billy Butcher's on his way in. And she's like, okay, like hold all my calls. But the idea behind this is that she's working with Billy Butcher because the two of them have a history going back a ways. But technically, Billy worked directly with her predecessor, right? So that when she came on, she inherited all this information about what Billy is about. Now, Billy Butcher basically had a team at one point that was designed to essentially monitor superheroes and then act against them if they needed to, right? So it was kind of, they were almost kind of like this clandestine Black Ops arm that allowed the CIA to operate in the borders of the United States, which it's not supposed to do, but create a kind of absolvency, right? So that if things went south, if Billy Butcher and his team were found out, the CIA could cut ties and be like, we don't know who they are, and absolve itself of any wrongdoing, right? And just kind of let them go. It's a kind of a cool little connection there because it allows both parties to benefit. But what it shows is the CIA actually has a vested interest in trying to find a way to either bring down superheroes or find out what they're truly up to, right? Because what this environment is showing us is that this is not the DC Comics universe where you have Superman who's always doing the right thing, and you have Batman who's kind of a dick but still doing the right thing, and then you have have Cyborg, who's just sitting around the watchtower watching like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Somebody explain this to me. What's the stance on the audience, on the fan base between Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, right? Like, somebody explain that to me. I need to know what the stance is between these two groups, because I've seen a lot of infighting. I've seen a lot of people who are just like, I like Legend of Korra, and then like Avatar fans are like, burn them. Like, I've heard all kinds of different things. It's kind of crazy. But the long and short of this is that with Billy Butcher working with his team, because of the fact that they kind of predate the current director of the CIA, because they predate Susan Rayner, she knows to work with them because she knows they're effective, but she doesn't really want to, right? And it's one of these things where she's kind of like, she's doing it, but not necessarily because she wants to, more because it's in their interest to do it, and because Billy Butcher's the kind of guy who can get things done, right? Who can basically make sure things get taken care of. Now, one of the things that I also want to point out too is one of the differences that really seems to happen between the early part of this comic and the TV show is in the TV show, A-Train ran into Robin, and that's basically what cost her arms, right? Like, he hit her at super speed. But what seems to have gone on here is it's not superheroes getting normal people killed. It really almost kind of feels like the latter half, or the second act of Kingdom Come, right? Where you basically have people with superpowers who are out there acting recklessly, and they don't really care what kind of impact they have on the general public, right? That's kind of how that feels. But one of the heartless natures of the superheroes come into play when Huey's like losing his mind over losing his fiance, and A-Train's like, you got people to take care of this, right? Cool, because I gotta go. Can't stop the A-Train, baby! And like takes off and just goes running. It's pretty heartless. Like, it's kind of a dick thing. But following this, we also go into what really kind of appears to be this darker clandestine situation here, when you have Huey, who basically met by these men in black. And so what they end up doing here is basically saying, hey, look, we'd like you to sign this agreement that basically says that you won't say anything and you'll be compensated accordingly, right? So what it looks like is there's a kind of entity out there that has a vested interest in trying to make sure that the superheroes stay in a positive light, that any incident that involves a superhero potentially getting somebody killed, either by direct or indirect action, has to be hushed, has to be kept quiet, so the general public kind of goes on with the facade that heroes are there to save them, and they're there to do the good thing, fight the good fight, that kind of stuff. Which again shows that it's superheroes acting in a very dark way, but also shows that you've got entities out there designed that are invested in making sure the superheroes are portrayed a certain way, right? So from there, you switch over to a guy named Kessler. Kessler's a guy who's basically a CIA analyst. Now, Kessler, working as part of the CIA, is kind of like the information man, right? So for those of you guys who are familiar with the Punisher, think of like Microchip, right? He's like the Microchip to Billy Butcher, basically, in the sense that he's the guy that basically collects information on behalf of superheroes for the CIA. He does it secretly. No one knows that he does. And then he used to pass that information off to Billy Butcher, and now he's doing it again, right? Like, Billy shows up and says, we're getting the team back together. It's time to start working together again. And so it's kind of a cool thing here, because this is when he basically learns about Huey. Now, to the average Joe out there, to the average person, they see whatever the spin was in the newspapers, right? They see what the newspapers want them to see, partly because they're probably only sticking to that source material, and two, because they're probably too lazy to look up anything else. But they basically see what the news wants them to see, but the reality is that Huey's caught up in a scenario where his fiance was killed by the action of a superhero, and Billy Butcher sees that. Billy Butcher says, okay, so this guy is someone that we can basically rally to our cause. And so where you have Huey sitting there just like struggling and dealing with the grief of losing his fiance, he's suddenly met by the arrival of Billy Butcher. And this is the cool thing here, is because Billy Butcher presents himself as a guy who's kind of like a very much a savior, right? Like, hey, I'm here to help you out, and I see you've been through some rough things, and I want to make life easier on you. I want to make life better on you. I want to put you in a situation to where you can basically, be okay, and you can help get past this. I know you felt like you lost someone. I can basically help you get to a place where you're going to experience happiness, and you're going to move away from this dark element, this dark place that you've been in. He really kind of shows himself and presents himself as a savior of sorts. I can solve all your problems. And so at that point, it jumps over to Frenchman. Now, Frenchman in the comic, at least in this introduction, I think is actually more interesting than the TV show. He's cool in the TV show, but in the comic, he's almost kind of poetic. I mean, he is in the show too, but in the comic, he's kind of poetic insofar that he's kind of going on about himself and kind of minding his own business and so on. And some guys basically call him like start calling him names. They call him like a French and it's like, okay, so like whatever, man, like if that's the kind of game you want to play. And it's cool because with these guys giving him a hard time, he basically helps them to understand their place in the bigger picture, right? And say, hey, look, you guys are coming to this from the perspective that I'm just like some average guy out there. Let me help you understand that I'm a person you don't mess with. And so these guys basically learn to understand that their place in the bigger picture is on the floor bleeding and suffering. It's cool to see bullies get dealt with in that way, right? And so it's a cool little moment, because then when Billy Butcher shows up, Frenchman greets him as a friend. And so this is again Garth Ennis basically telling us at some point along the line, Billy Butcher and Frenchman work together as a single unit, work together as a team, and that's kind of where we are now, right? The two of them kind of functioning together. And so from there, you go into the girl. Now in the TV show, the girl was introduced in a much different way, right? I mean, those of you guys who saw the show, the girl was introduced as somebody who was just like, stuck in a cage basically. literally. She was held in a cage down in like some really seedy, place. It looked like a meth lab, to be honest. And initially, the way it was depicted, it looked like she was a person being held for the purpose of just like whatever needs and desires the people who were holding her were using her for. Of course, we end up learning later on that there was a much bigger plot going on there. But in this instance, she just shows up at somebody's house. Now, we're not really given a backstory here. We just have her knocking on a door of what seems like a pretty seedy spot, like a very violent spot with some very bad guys. And when they open the door, she massacres them all, rips one of their faces off, literally just kills everybody in there. And so it's kind of nuts because, of course, Billy Butcher's going to recruit her. And that's one of the common themes that I hope you guys are picking up. Billy Butcher is traveling around and recruiting people that have a vendetta against superheroes. And if you're going to be a person who operates against superheroes, that's really what you need, right? Otherwise, you end up running into somebody who gets turned into a double agent. And then suddenly your operation's dead before it even started. And so again, it's cool in terms of how all this is sort of coming together. But it's an interesting thing because the question that was asked by Huey is, why do you want me in your ranks? And indeed, us as the reader were asking that question. Why in the world does Billy Butcher want Huey? Like, what does Huey have to offer? He's just a guy. And the response of Billy Butcher is, I want someone who's felt it before. I want someone who knows what it's like to lose someone to a superhero. And what this indicates is that Billy Butcher himself has lost someone to a superhero. Now, for those of you guys watching the show, a lot of you guys are really familiar with that. But if you haven't, then this is one of those things where it kind of teases at the idea that Billy has lost someone. And that's really kind of seems to be his motivation behind doing all this. And so what it does is it switches over to Mother's Milk, right? This next, really the last member that he recruits for the team. And Mother's Milk, for all his size and his bravado and how big he seems to be, really seems to be a softie in a lot of different ways. Because when he's talking to Billy, he's kind of like, look, my involvement in all that wet work stuff, that Black Ops CIA, all that kind of, spy business, that's all done. I don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. I'm done with all that stuff. But the funny thing is that when his daughter walks in, who's dressed like a woman of the night, when Janine comes walking in, she just kind of starts mouthing off. And it's just kind of like, I can go where I want and talk to who I want, and I can dress how I want, and there's nothing you can do about it, and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting because what Mother's Milk seems to have been doing is trying to settle down and basically like going through kind of like adopting kids, things like that, trying to bring them up and give them a more productive life so they can have an actual future as opposed to succumbing to like gang violence or drugs or any number of negative influences. And so what happens is Billy Butcher steps in. And so when Billy Butcher, when he goes outside and starts talking to these guys, these really like seedy looking guys that Janine's hanging out with, it's kind of like, hey, look, you need to go back in there and basically apologize to your dad. And one of the guys pulls a gun. Of course, Billy Butcher takes the gun, smashes it. The guys drive off because, they're cowards. And then in turn, Billy Butcher starts talking to Janine. And this is a very important thing because up to this point, Billy Butcher's kind of been presented to us as a guy who just does like, he's like, it's my way or the highway. Either you're in the way or you're helping me along the way. But having this conversation with Janine shows him to be a lot deeper than that insofar as he's talking to her and basically saying, hey, look, like your father puts clothes on your back. Like you're able to live the life that you live because your father's working his ass off to make it that way. So if you want to be an adult and if you really want to have your freedom as an adult and make your own choices in this world, then leave. You can go back to your mom's house, but she's a drug addict and alcoholic, so who knows what fate will befall you. If you want to have a productive life, if you want to have a life that goes somewhere, then you got to respect the rules of the house, right? You can't have it both ways. You can't say on one hand, I will take everything that you give me to support me and make sure I'm okay. And then on the other hand, say, but I don't have to do what you want me to do. I can just go out and do my own thing, right? You don't get to have it both ways. Like if you want the benefit of living under another person's house, you got to follow the rules of living under that person's house. And so it's a cool little moment when he talks to her because he basically says, get back in there and apologize and start dressing like you have some self-respect. It's a cool little moment. It's a cool little thing there. But ultimately, you end up having Billy Butcher who goes back to Huey and says, hey, look, I know you're on the fence about this. That's fine. Take some time to think about it because a lot of this takes place in Scotland. So he's like, I know you're on the fence about it. That's fine. Here's a whole bunch of cash. See if you can book a flight to America and basically, meet me in New York and we'll go from there. If I don't see you there, then you don't want to be a part of the team. If I do see you there, we'll go forward accordingly. So it's cool. It's forming the team of the boys. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Peace.